All right, we are live. We are live. We are live. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Emunah Yisrael, Solomonics 101 LEV project, making our way through on the very back end of this year-long uh, community effort to um, heighten our awareness and knowledge of the voices of those who came through the transatlantic slave trade. When I started, we have like we have like what 18 more days left in the year. And when it was started, the hope was, right, 12 months later, they said if you want something done, you gotta do it yourself. Because the hope was, and I give thanks to the few, and I say few, I mean the few who did stick with us throughout the year and who did lend their voices. But nonetheless, because I was the person who thought this was necessary and needed. Sometimes never underestimate the power of one. And so I give the Most High thanks for allowing me to continue in this way. Uh, Tired a little bit. I haven't been on since November because of, I did get tired, honestly. And then I said, oh, it's time for me to finish off strong. So if you are listening and you would like to lend your voice, I was looking for more of the males. Our brother from the Disciples Way, he came on. We have a few who came on earlier on, but then after that, it's just been crickets. But nonetheless, the children who come along and could benefit from it, I know I benefited immensely. I know we have Sister Angel who always speaks of how she's benefiting, as well as Sister Tish, and some others who person kid, you know, again, those who listen and find the value in it. So I'm gonna start off because at least I want to be able to finish Olaudah. I'm gonna continue reading, but more likely offline and share a little bit of the nuggets that I find along the way. But I'm gonna start now so that hopefully before the end of the year, I'm confident we should be able to finish the end of the book. So what chapter is this? We're reading the life of Olaudah Equiano. So much has happened. If you missed it, feel free to go back. This is chapter 6 and section 7. Yes, Sister Angel. Yes, it's been a good time. Sometimes it's so much that you have to just let it marinate, because this is not like you're flipping through the Charlie Brown comics. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot. So sometimes it gets so heavy, and I've been writing a lot of poetry lately, and people must be like, what's up with Emunah? If you missed the poetry, check it out at Instagram, or follow me on Instagram, and you will get the poems. I've just been inspired to do a lot of writing since I've done so much reading. It has to flow. You can't allow the energy to get trapped in spaces. It has to be this flow. And so definitely it's coming out in poetry. Can't get to the studio right now to do any songs. So for right now, poetry is where it's at, and short stories. So 7. This is Olaudah Equiano. The link is in the box. Okay, the link is in the box if you want to follow along. And again, if you would like to read, just let me know. It says, this was a change indeed. In the same hour, to feel the most exquisite pain, and in the turn of a moment, the fullest joy. If I can remember correctly, he thought he was going to be released. There's a lot of stuff going on with him. He's transferring masters. And so we're going to see if we can catch back where we were. It caused in me such sensation as I was only able to express in my looks. My heart was so overpowered with gratitude that I could have kissed both of their feet. When I left the room, I immediately went, or rather flew, to the vessel, which, being loaded, my master, as good as his word, trusting me with a tierce of rum and another of sugar, when we sailed and arrived safe at the elegant town of Philadelphia. Yeah, he wanted to come to America. He wanted to leave the islands the last time I remember. I soon sold my goods here pretty well, and in this charming town I found everything plentiful and cheap. While I was in this place, a very extraordinary occurrence befell me. I had been told one evening of a wise woman, all capital, a Mrs. Davis, who revealed secrets and foretold events. Okay, so obviously a woman, I suppose. Wait, hold on. We're having a little. He goes on to say, I put little faith in this story at first, as I could not conceive that any mortals could foresee the future disposals of Providence. nor did I believe in any other revelation than that of the Holy Scriptures. However, hold on one second. However, he says, I was greatly astonished at seeing this woman in a dream that night, though a person I never before beheld in my life. This made such an impression on me that I could not get the idea next day out of my mind. And I then became as anxious to see her as I was before indifferent. Accordingly, in the evening after we left off working, I inquired where she lived, and being directed to her, to my inexpressible surprise, beheld the very woman in the very same dress she appeared to me to wear in the vision. She immediately told me I had dreamed of her the preceding night, relating to me many things that had happened with a correctness that astonished me, and finally told me I should not be a slave, be long a slave. This was the most agreeable news, as I believed it the most readily than her having so faithfully related the past incidents of my life. She said I should be twice in very danger of my life within 18 months, which, if I escape, I should afterwards go on well. So, giving me her blessing, we parted. After staying here some time till our vessel was loaded, and I had brought in my little traffic, we sailed for the agreeable spot from Montserrat once more to encounter the raging surfs. We arrived safe at Montserrat, where we discharged our cargo, and soon after that we took slaves on board for St. Eustatia, and from thence to Georgia. Okay, if you remember correctly, he was kidnapped like 12, 13 years old from the continent. And he's been all over so far. He's been to England. He was a shipman. He came to America. He didn't stay long a slave. And so his experience has been, even though he was in slavery, he more served like a servant than a slave. And so we're going to continue. I had always exerted myself and did double work in order to make our voyages as short as possible. And from thus overworking myself while we were at Georgia, I caught a fever and an ague. I was very ill for 11 days and near dying. Externity was now exceedingly impressed on my mind, and I feared very much that awful event. I prayed that the LORD therefore to spare me, and I made a promise in my mind to God that I would be good if ever I should recover. At length, from having an eminent doctor to attend, I was restoring again to health. Soon after, we got the vessel loaded and set off for Montserrat. During the passage, I was perfectly restored and had much business on the vessel to mind. All my endeavors to keep up my integrity and perform my promise to God began to fail, and in spite of all I could do, as we drew nearer and nearer to the islands, my resolutions more and more declined, as if the very air of the country or climate seemed fatal to piety. When we were safe arrived at Montserrat, and I had got ashore, I forgot my former resolutions. Alas, how prone is the heart to leave that God it wishes to love, and how strongly do the things of this world strike the senses and captivate the soul. After our vessel was discharged, we soon got her ready and took in, as usual, some of the poor oppressed natives of Africa and other Negroes. We then set off again for Georgia and Charleston. We arrived at Georgia, and having landed part of our cargo, proceeded to Charleston with the remainder. While we were there, I saw the town illuminated. The guns were fired, and bonfires and other demonstrations of joy shown on account of the repeal of the Stamp Act. Here I disposed of some goods on my account, the white men buying them with smooth promises and fair words, giving me, however, but very indifferent payment. There was one gentleman particularly who brought a puncheon of rum of me, and gave me a great deal of trouble. Although I used the interest of my friendly captain, I could obtain nothing for it, and could not oblige him to pay me. This vexed me much. Not knowing how to act, I lost time in seeking after this Christian, and though when the Sabbath came, with the Negroes usually made their holiday, I was inclined to go to public worship, yet I was obliged to hire some black men to help to pull a boat across the water to go in quest of this gentleman. When I found him, after much entreaty both from myself and my worthy captain, he had at last paid me in dollars. Some of them, however, were copper, and of consequence of no value. But he took advantage of me, my being a Negro man, and obliged me to put up with those or none, although I objected to them. Immediately after, as I was trying to pass them in the market amongst other white men, I was abused for offering to pass bad coin, and though I showed them the man I had got them from, meaning counterfeit, I was within 1 minute of being tied up and flogged without either judge or jury. However, by the help of a good pair of heels, I ran off and so escaped the bastinados I should have received. I got on board as fast as I could, but still continued in fear of them until we sailed, which I thank God we did not long after, and I have never been amongst them since. And now we're into section 8 of chapter 6. And so here we go. We soon came to Georgia, where we were to complete our lading, and here worse fate than ever attended me. For one Sunday night, as I was with some Negroes in their master's yard in the town of Savannah, it happened that their master, one Dr. Perkins, who was a very severe and cruel man, came in drunk, and not liking to see any strange Negroes in his yard, he and a ruffian of a white man he had in his service beset me in an instant, and both of them struck me with the fists, weapons they could get hold of. The first weapons they could get hold of. I cried out as long as I could for help and mercy, but though I gave a good account of myself, and he knew my captain, who lodged hard by him, it was to no purpose. They beat and mangled me in a shameful manner, leaving me nearly dead. I lost so much blood from the wounds I received that I lay quite motionless, and was so benumbed that I could not feel anything for many hours. Early in the morning, they took me away to the jail, and I did not return to the ship all night. My captain, not knowing where I was, and being uneasy that I did not then make my appearance, made inquiry after me, and having found where I was, he immediately came to me. As soon as the good man saw me, he so cut and mangled, he could not forbear weeping. He soon got me out of jail to his lodgings, and immediately sent for the best doctors in the place, who at first declared it is as their opinion that I could not recover. My captain on this went to all the lawyers in the town for their advice, but they told him they could not do nothing for me, as I was a Negro. He then went to Dr. Perkins, the hero who had vanquished me. And menaced him, swearing he would be revenged of him and challenged him to fight. But cowardice is ever the companion of cruelty, and the doctor refused. However, by the skillfulness of one Dr. Brady of that place, I began at last to amend. But although I was so sore and bad with the wounds I had all over me that I could not rest in any posture, yet I was in more pain on account of the captain's uneasiness about me than otherwise should have been. The worthy man nursed and watched me all the hours of the night, and I was, through his attention and that of the doctor, able to get out of bed in about 17 or 18 days. All this time I was very much wanted on board, as I used to frequently go up and down the river for rafts and other parts of our cargo, and stow them when the mate was sick or absent. In about 4 weeks I was able to go on duty, and in the fortnight after, having got all our landing, our vessel set sail for Montserrat, and in less than 3 weeks we arrived there safe, towards the end of the year. This ended my adventures in 1765, for I did not leave Montserrat again to the beginning of the following year. That was the end of chapter 6. Now, for time's sake, we're going to proceed to chapter 7. All right. It says here, the authors discussed at the West Indies formed schemes to obtain his freedom. Ludicrous disappoint he and his captain met with in Georgia. At last, by several successful voyages, he acquired a sum of money sufficient to purchase it, applies to his master, who accepts it and grants his manumission. To his great joy, he afterwards enters a free man on board of Mr. King's ship and sails for Georgia, in positions on free Negroes as usual. His venture of turkeys sails for Montserrat, and on his passage his friend the captain falls ill and dies. So they give us the overview, chapter 7. Every day now brought me nearer my freedom, and I was impatient till we proceeded again to sea, that I might have an opportunity of getting a large sum enough to purchase it.
I was not long ungratified, for in the beginning of the year of 1766, my master bought another sloop named the Nancy, the largest I'd ever seen. She was partly laden and was to proceed to Philadelphia. Our captain had his choice of three, and I was well pleased he chose this, which was the largest. For his having a large vessel, I had more room and could carry a larger quantity of goods with me. Accordingly, when we had delivered our old vessel, the Prudence, and completed the landing of the Nancy, having made near 300% by 4 barrels of pork I brought from Charleston, I laid it as large a cargo as I could, trusting to God's providence to prosper my undertaking with the pork. With these views, I sailed for Philadelphia. On our passage, when we drew near the land, I was for the first time surprised at the sight of some whales, having never seen any such large sea monsters before. And as we sailed by the land, one morning I saw a puppy whale close by the vessel. It was about the length of a wherry boat, and it followed us all the day until we got within the Capes. We arrived safe and in good time at Philadelphia, and I sold my goods there chiefly to the Quakers. They always appeared to be very honest and discreet sort of people, and never attempted to impose on me. I therefore liked them, and ever after chose to deal with them in preference to any others. One Sunday morning while I was here, as I was going to church, I chanced to pass a meeting house. The doors being open and the house full of people, it excited my curiosity to go in. When I entered the house, to my great surprise, I saw a very tall woman standing in the midst of them, speaking in an audible voice something which I could not understand. Having never been any kind of this kind before, or seen anything of this kind before, I stood and stared about me for some time, wondering at this odd scene. As soon as it was over, I took an opportunity to make inquiry about the place and people. When I was informed they were called Quakers, I particularly asked what that woman I saw in the midst of them had said. But none of them were pleased to satisfy me, so I quitted them, and soon after, as I was returning, I came to church crowded with people. The churchyard was full likewise, and a number of people were even mounted on ladders, looking in at the windows. I thought this a strange sight, as I had never seen churches either in England or the West Indies crowded in this manner before. I therefore made bold to ask some people the meaning of all this, and they told me the Reverend George Whitfield was preaching. I had often heard of this gentleman and had wished to see and hear him, but I had never before an opportunity. I now therefore resolved to gratify myself with the sight and press in amidst the multitude. When I got into the church, I saw this pious man exhorting the people with the greatest fervor and earnestness, and sweating as much as ever I did while in slavery on Montserrat Beach. I was very much struck and impressed with this. I thought it strange I had never seen divines exert themselves in this manner before, and was no longer at loss to account for the thin congregations they preached to. Section 2, Chapter 7. When we had discharged our cargo here and were loaded again, we left this fruitful land once more and set sail for Montserrat. My traffic had hitherto succeeded so well with me that I thought by selling my goods when we arrived at Montserrat, I should have enough to purchase my freedom. But as soon as our vessel arrived there, my master came on board and gave orders for us to go to St. Eustatia and discharge our cargo there, and from thence to proceed for Georgia. I was much disappointed at this, but thinking as usual it was of no use to murmur at the decrees of fate, I submitted without repining, and we went to St. Eustatia. After we had discharged our cargo there, we took in a live cargo, as well as we call a cargo of slaves. Here I sold my goods tolerably well, but not being able to lay out all my money in this small island to as much advantage as in many other places, I laid out only part, and remainder I brought away with me neat. We sailed hence for Georgia, and I was glad when we got there, though I had not much reason to like the place for my last adventure in Savannah. But I longed to get back to Montserrat and procure my freedom, which I expected to be able to purchase with when I returned. As soon as we had arrived here, I waited on my careful doctor, Mr. Brady, to whom I made the most grateful acknowledgments in my power for his former kindness and attention during my illness. While we remained here, an odd circumstance happened to the captain and me, which disappointed us both a great deal. For those who have just joined us, this is Emunah Yisrael, the LEV project. We are in the bottom half, right? This is the last inning, the bottom half of it. 18 more days to the end of the Greco-Roman year. And we started in the beginning of this Greco-Roman year, the LEV project. We are on our last narrative for the year, which is Olaudah Equiano's The Life of the life of Olaudah Equiano. I'm sorry. And this is chapter 7, if you would like to follow along, portion number 2. While, and now at this point, for many times over, he's still trying to get his freedom. While we remained here, an odd circumstance happened to the captain and me, which disappointed us both a great deal. A silversmith whom we had brought to this place some voyages before agreed with the captain to return to the West Indies, and promised at the same time to give the captain a great deal of money, having pretended to take a liking to him, and being, as we thought, very rich. But while we stayed to load our vessel, this man was taken ill in a house where he worked, and in a week's time became very bad. The worse he grew, the more he used to speak of giving the captain what he had promised him, so that he expected something considerable from the death of this man, who had no wife or child, and he attended him day and night. I used also to go with the captain at his own desire, to attend him, especially when we saw there was no appearance of his recovery. And in order to recompense me for my trouble, the captain promised me £10 when he should get the man's property. I thought this would be of great service to me, although I had nearly money enough to purchase my freedom, if I should get safe to this voyage to Montserrat. In this expectation, I laid out about £8 of my money for a suit of superfine clothes to dance in at my freedom. I can't. He's buying clothes before I can't. Okay. Which I hoped was then at hand. We still continued to attend this man, and were with him even on the last day he lived, till very late at night, when we went on board after we were got to bed. About 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, the captain was sent for and was informed the man was dead. On this, he came to my bed and waked me, informing me of it, and desired me to get up, procure a light, and to go immediately with him. I told him I was very sleepy and wished he would take someone else with him, or else, as the man was dead and could not no further attendance, to let all things remain as they were till the morning. No, no, said he, we have the money tonight. We will have the money tonight. I cannot wait till tomorrow, so let us go. Accordingly, I got up and struck a light, and away we went. We both went, and saw the man as dead as we could wish. The captain said he would give him a grand burial in gratitude for the promised treasure, and desired that all things belonging to the deceased might be brought forth. Amongst others, there was a nest of trunks, of which he had kept the keys whilst the man was ill. And when they were produced, we opened them with no small eagerness and expectation, as there was a great number within one another, and much impatience we took them out each other. At last, when we came to the smallest and he opened it, we saw it was full of papers, which we supposed to be notes, at the sight of which our hearts leapt for joy. And that instant the captain, clapping his hands, cried out, "Thank God, here it is." But when we began to examine the supposed treasure and long look for bounty, alas, alas, how uncertain and deceitful are all human affairs. What had we found? While we thought we were embracing a substance, we grasped an empty nothing. The whole amount in the nest of the trunk was only $1.50, and all that the man possessed would not buy for his coffin. Our sudden and exquisite joy was now succeeded by a sudden and exquisite pain, and my captain and I exhibited for some time most ridiculous pictures of chagrin and disappointment. We went away greatly mortified, and left the deceased to do as well as he could for himself, as we had taken so good care of him when alive for nothing. So he thinks they think they're getting a payday off the man, and it didn't happen. For those who just joined us, this is Emunah Israel. We are reading the life of Olaudah Equiano. We are on chapter 7, section 3. We set sail once more for Montserrat, and arrived there safe, but much out of humor with our friend, the silversmith, when we had unladen the vessel, and I had sold my venture, finding my master of about £47. I consulted my true friend, the captain, how I should proceed in offering my master the money for my freedom. He told me to come on a certain morning when he and my master would be at breakfast together. Accordingly, On that morning, I went and met the captain there as he had appointed. When I went in, I made my obeisance to my master, and with my money in hand and many fears in my heart, I prayed him to be as good as his offer to me, when he was pleased to promise me my freedom as soon as I could purchase it. This speech seemed to confound him. He began to recoil, and my heart that instant sunk within me. What, said he, give you your freedom? Why? Where did you get the money? How you got 40 pounds sterling? Yes, sir, I answered. How did I get it? Replied he. I told him very honestly. The captain then said he knew I got money very honestly and with much industry, and that I was particularly careful. On which my master replied, I got money much faster than he did, and said he would not have made me the promise which he did, had he thought I should have got the money so soon. Come, come, said my worthy captain, clapping my master on the back. Come, Robert, which was his name. I think you must let him have his freedom. You have laid your money out very well. You have received good interest for it all this time. And here is now the principal at last. I know Gustavus has earned you more than 100 a year, and he will still save you money, as he will not leave you. Come, Robert, take the money, my master then said. He will not be worse than his promise. And taking the money, told me to go to secretary at the register office and get my manumission drawn up. The words of my master were like a voice from heaven to me. In an instant, all my trepidation was turned into unutterable bliss, and I most reverently bowed myself and with gratitude, unable to express my feelings, but by the overflow of my eyes and a heart replete with thanks to God, while my true and worthy friend, the captain, congratulated us both with a peculiar degree of heartfelt pleasure. As soon as the first transports of my joy were over, and that I had expressed my thanks to these my worthy friends, he called them worthy friends, in the best manner I was able, I rose with a heart full of affection and reverence and left the room in order to obey my master's joyful mandate of going to the registrar's office. As I was leaving the house, I called to mind the words of the psalmist in Psalms 126. And like him, I glorified God in my heart, in whom I had trusted. These words had been impressed on my mind from the very day I was forced from Deptford to present hour, and now saw them, as I thought, fulfilled and verified. My imagination was all rapture as I flew to the register's office, and in this respect, like the Apostle Peter, whose deliverance from prison was so sudden and extraordinary that he thought he was in a vision, I could scarcely believe I was awake. Heavens! Who could do justice to my feelings at this moment? Not conquering heroes themselves in the midst of triumph, not the tender mother who had just regained her long-lost infant and pressed it to her heart, not the weary, hungry mariner at the sight of desired friendly port, not the lover when he once more embraces his loved mistress, after she had been ravished from his arms. All within my breast was tumult, wildness, and delirium. My feet scarcely touched the ground, for they were winged with joy, and like Elijah as he rose to heaven, they were like lightning speed as I went on. Every one I met, I told of my happiness and blazed about the virtue of my amiable master and captain. When I got to the office and acquainted the register with my errand, he congratulated me on the occasion and told me he would draw up my manumission for half price, which was a guinea. I thanked him for his kindness in having received it and paid him. I hastened to my master to get him to sign it, that I might be fully released. Accordingly, he signed the manumission that day. So that before night, I, who had been a slave in the morning, trembled at the will of another, was become my own master and completely free. I thought this was the happiest day I had ever experienced, and my joy was so still heightened by the blessing and prayers of many of the sable race, particularly the age to whom my heart had ever been attached with reverence. As the form of my manumission has something peculiar in it and express the absolute power and dominion one man claims over his fellow, I shall beg leave to present it before my readers at full length. Okay, he's going to read his manumission right now. This is going to be interesting. So if you give me one moment, let me get a little water here, and then I'll be right back so that we can read Olaudah's. As a matter of fact, no, I'm going to ask my daughter. 1 second. All right. It says here, this is section 4. In short, the fair as well as black people immediately styled me by a new appellation, to me the most desirable in the world, which was free man. And at the dances I gave, my Georgia superfine blue clothes made no indifferent appearance as I thought. Some of the sable females who formerly stood aloof now began to relax and appear less coy, but my heart was still fixed on London, where I hoped to be ere long, so that my worthy captain and his owner, my late master, finding that the bent of my mind was towards London, said to me, "We hope you won't leave us, but that you will still be with the vessels." Here gratitude bowed me down, and none but the generous mind can judge of my feelings struggling between inclination and duty. However, notwithstanding my wish to be in London, I obediently answered my benefactors that I would go in the vessel and not leave them. And from that day I was entered on board at an able-bodied seaman at 36 shillings per month. Besides that, what prerequisite I could make. Thank you. My intention was to take a voyage or two, entirely to please them, my honored patrons, but I determined that the year following, if it pleased God, I would see old England once more and surprise my old master, Captain Pascal, who was hourly in my mind, for I still loved him. I noticed that he has a lot of attachment to his oppressor. You hardly see him having any attachment to or any of his quote unquote kind. He loved the oppressor. This is very interesting. How he distances himself from those who look like him, like many would say, Stockholm. Let me hold on 1 second. 1 second. Yeah, he shows a lot of affection towards his master. I can't seem to get a pen. I'll mark it down in a minute. He says, notwithstanding his uses to me, and I pleased myself with thinking of what he would say when we saw that the Lord LORD had done for me in so short a time, instead of being, as he might perhaps suppose, under the cruel yoke of some planter. With such reveries I used often to entertain myself and shorten the time till my return. And now, being as in my original free African style, I embarked on board the Nancy after having got all things ready for our voyage. In this state of serenity we sailed for St. Eustatia, and having smooth seas and calmer weather, we soon arrived there after taking our cargo on board. Where am I here? He says here, and having smooth seas and calm weather, and soon arrived there. After taking our cargo on board, we proceeded to Savannah in Georgia in August 1766. While we were there, as usual, I used to go for the cargo up the river in boats, and when on this business I have been frequently beset by alligators, which were very numerous on the coast and river. I have shot many of them when they have been near getting into our boats, which we have the great difficulty sometimes preventing, and having been very much frightened at them, I have seen a young one sold in Georgia alive for 6 pence. During our stay at this place, on evening, a slave belonging to Mr. Reed, a merchant of Savannah, came near our vessel and began to use me very ill. I entreated him with all the patience of which I was mastered to desist, as I knew there was little or no law for free negro here. But the fellow, instead of taking my advice, persevered in his insults and even struck me. At this I lost all temper and fell on him and beat him soundly. The next morning his master came to our vessel as we lay alongside the wharf, and desired me to come ashore that he might have me flogged all around the town for beating his Negro slave. I told him he had insulted me and he'd given the provocation by fist of striking me. I had also told my captain that that whole affair the morning and desired him to go along with me to Mr. Reed to prevent bad consequences, but he said that it did not signify, and if Mr. Reed said anything, he would make matters up and desired me to go to work, which I accordingly did. The captain being on board when Mr. Reed came and applied to him to deliver me up, he said he knew nothing of the matter. I was a free man. I was astonished and frightened at this. And he keeps being frightened, but they always lure him in, and then they leave him out there, and still he believes. I thought I had better keep where I was than go ashore and be flogged round the town without judge or jury. I therefore refused to stir, and Mr. Reed went away, swearing he would bring all the constables in the town, for he would have me out of the vessel. When he was gone, I thought his threat might prove too true to my sorrows, and I was confirmed in this belief as well by the many instances I had seen of the treatment of free Negroes, as from a fact that had happened within my own knowledge here a short time before. There was a free black man, so-called black, a carpenter that I knew, who, for asking a gentleman that he had worked for the money he had earned, was put into gaol. And afterwards, this oppressed man was sent from Georgia with false accusations of intention to set the gentleman's house on fire and run away with his slaves. I was therefore much embarrassed and very apprehensive of a flogging at least. I dreaded of all things the thoughts of being stripped, as I never in my life had the marks of any violence of that kind. At that instant, a rage seized my soul, and for a little I determined to resist the first man that should attempt to lay violent hands on me, or basely use me without a trial. For I would sooner die like a free man than suffer myself to be scourged by the hands of ruffians, and my blood drawn like a slave. The captain and others more cautious advised me to make haste and conceal myself, for they said Mr. Reed was a spiteful man, and he would soon come on board with constables and take me. At first I refused this counsel, being determined to stand my ground, but at length, by the prevailing entreaties of Captain and Mr. Dixon, we lodged, I went to Mr. Dixon's house, which is a little out of the town, at a place called Kiara or Chira. I was but just gone when Mr. Reed and the constables came for me and searched the vessel, but not finding me there, he swore he would have me dead or alive. I was secreted about 5 days, and however good character with my captain always gave me, as well as other gentlemen who also knew me, procured me some friends. At last, some of them told my captain that he did not use me well in suffering me thus to be imposed upon, and said they would see me redressed and get me on board some other vessel. My captain on this immediately went to Mr. Reed and told him that ever since I eloped from the vessel, his work had been neglected, and he could not go on with her, loading himself and mate not being well. And as I managed things on board for him, my absence must have retarded his voyage and consequently hurt the owner. He therefore begged of him to forgive me, as he said he never heard of my complaint of me before, during the several years I have been with him, after repeated entreaties. Mr. Negro, I was going to call him Mr. Negro. Mr. Reed said I might go to hell, and that he would not meddle with me, on which my captain came immediately to me at his lodging and told me how pleasant matters had gone, and desired me to go on board. Some of my other friends then asked him if he had got the constable's warrant from them. The captain said no. On this I was desired by them to stay in the house, and they said they would get me on board of some other vessel before the evening. When the captain heard this, he became almost distracted. He went immediately for the warrant, and after using every exertion in his power, he at last got it from my hunters, but I had all the expenses to pay. So this dude, the quote slave, he says, he calls him slave. He doesn't see himself as that. He never been treated as such. He gets in trouble. The slave master's like, you hurt my property. He's hiding on the boat, a free slave. Yeah, he's hiding on the boat. And it's just so funny how he doesn't see himself. And throughout the narrative, he's never seen himself as his fellow enslaved. Because I guess his fate was different, so he kind of saw himself. So we have two more sections in this. hopefully we're gonna move through this. Wow, we're gonna move through this in the next 18 days. We could definitely do it. I have less than 18 chapters, so I definitely know I could hit out a chapter, you know. So let's hit it. Section 5. After I had thanked all my friends for their kindness, I went on board again to my work, of which I had always plenty. We were in haste to complete our landings and were to carry 20 head of cattle with us to the West Indies, where they are a very profitable article. In order to encourage me in working and make up for the time I had lost, my captain promised me the privilege of carrying 2 bullocks of my own with me. This made me work with redoubled ardor. As soon as I had got the vessel loaded, in doing which I was obliged to perform the duty of the mate as well as my own work, and when the bullocks were near coming on board, I asked the captain leave to bring my 2 according to his promise. But, can you almost guess? To my great surprise, he told me there was no room for them. I then asked him to permit me to take one, but he said he could not. I was a good deal mortified at this usage and told him I had no notion that he intended thus to impose on me, nor could I think well of any man that was so much worse than his word. On this we had some disagreement, and I gave him to understand that I intend to leave the vessel. At this he appeared to be very much dejected, and our mate, who had been very quickly and whose duty had long devolved upon me, advised him to persuade me to stay, in consequence of which he spoke very kindly to me, making many fair promises, telling me that as the mate was so sickly, he could not do without me, and that as the safety of the vessel and cargo depended greatly upon me, he therefore hoped that I would not be offended at what he had passed between us, and sure he would make up all matters when he arrived in the West Indies. So I consented to slave on as before. It's interesting. He consented. So now he's free. He's a free man, but now he's still working for a swindler of an employer. Soon after this, and this is what befalls oftentimes, you're free, but you still have to live. You still have to sustain, and the very system in which you're free in is meant to trap. Soon after this, as the bullocks were coming on board, one of them ran at the captain and butted him so furiously in the breast that he never recovered of the blow. In order to make me some amends for this treatment about the bullocks, the captain now pressed me very much to take some turkeys and other fowls with me, and gave me liberty to take as many as I could find room for. But I told him he knew very well I had never carried any turkeys before, as I always thought they were such tender birds as were not fit to cross the seas. However, he continued to press me to buy them for once, and what seemed very surprising to me, the more I was against it, the more he urged me taking them, insomuch that he insured me for all losses that might happen by them, and I was prevailed on to take them. But I thought this very strange, as he had never acted so with me before. This, and not being able to dispose of my paper money in any other way, induced me at length to take 4 dozen. The turkeys, however, I was so dissatisfied about that I determined to make no more voyages to this quarter, nor with this captain, and was very apprehensive that my free voyage would be the worst I had ever made. We set sail for Montserrat. The captain and the mate had been both complaining of sickness when we sailed, and as we proceeded on our voyage, they grew worse. This was about November, and we had not been long at sea before we began to meet with strong northerly gales and rough seas, and in about 7 or 8 days, all the bullocks were near being drowned, and 4 or 5 of them died. Our vessel, which had not been tight at first, was much less so now, and though we were but 9 in the whole, including 5 sailors and myself, yet we were obliged to attend to the pumps every half or 3/4 of an hour. The captain and mate came on deck as often as they were able, which was not now but seldom, for they declined so fast that they were not well enough to make observations above 4 or 5 times the whole passage. The whole care of the vessel rested therefore upon me, and I was obliged to direct her by mere dint of reason, not being able to work or a traverse. The captain was now very sorry he had not taught me navigation, and protested if ever he should get well again, he would not fail to do so. But in about 17 days, his illness increased so much that he was obliged to keep his bed, continued sensible. However, until the last, constantly having the owner's interest at heart, for this just and benevolent man ever appeared much concerned about the welfare of what he was entrusted with. When this dear friend found the symptoms of death approaching, he called me by my name, and when I came to him, he asked, with almost his last breath, if he had ever done me any harm. Seriously, now you got conscience? You just did him harm just like 2 seconds ago. But anyway, this reminds me of Henry Box Brown. Like, pray for me after you done. Anyway, let me not go there because that one was upsetting. Uh, he says, God forbid I should think so, I replied. Of course, he's lying. Uh, he said, I should then be the most ungrateful of wretches to the best of benefactors. While I was thus expressing my affection and sorrow by his bedside, see you, the face of the slave who was forced to lie. Otherwise, us, you're going to face their wrath, right? So he says, unless I would be, he says, oh, God forbid I should think so, I replied. I should then be the most ungrateful of wretches to the best of benefactors. Dude, he had you in slavery, but anyway. While I was thus expressing my affections and sorrow by his bedside, he expired without saying another word, and the day following we committed his body to the deep. So they threw him over. Every man on the board loved him, and he regretted his death, but I was exceedingly affected at it and found that I did not know till he was gone the strength of my regard for him. Indeed, I had every reason in the world to be attached to him. Here we go again with his attachments. For besides that, he was in general mind, affable, generous, faithful, benevolent. Sound like he giving the benediction here. And just. He was to me a friend and father, and had it pleased Providence that he had died but 5 months before. I verily believed I should not have obtained my freedom when I did, and it is not improbable that I might not have been able to get it at any rate afterwards. And section 6 of chapter 7. The captain being dead, the mate came on deck and made such observations as he was able, but to no purpose. In the course of a few days, the few bullocks that remained were found dead, but the turkeys I had, though on deck and exposed to so much wet and bad weather, did well, and I afterwards gained near 300% on the sale of them, so that in the event it proved a happy circumstance for me that I had not bought the bullocks I intended, for they must have perished with the rest. I could not help looking upon this otherwise trifling circumstance as a particular providence of God, and was accordingly thankful. The care of the vessel took up all my time and engaged my attention entirely. As we were now out of the variable winds, I thought I should not be much puzzled to hit the island. I was persuaded I steered right for Antigua, which I wished to reach as the nearest to us, and in the course of 9 or 10 days we made the island to our great joy, and the day after we came safe to Montserrat. Many were surprised when they heard of my conducting the sloop into the port, and I now obtained a new appellation and was called captain. This elated me not a little, and it was quite flattering to my vanity to thus styled by as high a title as any sable freeman in this place possessed. When the death of the captain became known, he was much regretted by all who knew him, for he was a man universally respected. At the same time, the sable captain lost no fame, for the success I had met with increased the affection of my friends in no small measure, and I was offered by a gentleman of the place the command of his sloop to go amongst the islands, but I refused. So now he's saying he got clout now. Uh, let me see. Let's touch a little bit of chapter 8 here, since I've been missing it actually for like 2 weeks, right? I'm gonna read as far as my voice can take me. Woo! Chapter 8. It says, the author, to oblige Mr. King, once more embarks for Georgia in the Nancy. A new captain is appointed. They sail and steal a new course. 3 remarkable dreams. The vessel is wrecked on Bahama banks, but the crew are preserved principally by means of author. He sets out for an island with the captain in a small boat in quest of a ship. Their distress, meet with a wrecker, sail for Providence, are overtaken again by a terrible storm, and are all near perishing. Arrive at New Providence. The author, after some time, sails for thence to Georgia, meets another storm, and is obliged to put back and rift. Arrives at Georgia, meets new impositions. 2 white men attempt to kidnap him, officiate as a parson at the funeral ceremony, bids adieu to Georgia, and sails for Martinico. So his life, there's never a dull moment, in his life.
it seems. So, chapter 8, section 1. As I had now, by the death of my captain, lost my great benefactor and friend, I had little inducement to remain longer in the West Indies, except my gratitude to Mr. King, which I thought I had pretty well discharged in bringing back his vessel safe, and delivering his cargo to his satisfaction. I began to think of leaving this part of the world of which I had been long tired, and of returning to England where my heart had always been. But Mr. King still pressed me very much to stay with his vessel, and he had done so much for me that I found myself unable to refuse his request, and consented to go on another voyage to Georgia as the mate from his ill state of health, and was quite useless in the vessel. Accordingly, a new captain was appointed, whose name was William Phillips, an old acquaintance of mine, and having refitted our vessel and taken several slaves on board, we set sail. Like he says it like this, matter of factly. And I'm saying they was transporting people from the Caribbean, back and forth from the Caribbean to the States. So it's quite, and from island to island as well, which is very interesting stuff. It goes on to say, uh, it says, having refitted our vessel and taken several slaves on board, we set sail for St. Eustatia, where we stayed but a few days, and on the 30th of January, 1767, we steered for Georgia. Our new captain boasts strangely of his skill in navigating and conducting a vessel, and in consequence of this, he steered a new course, several points more to the westward than we ever did before. This appeared to me very extraordinary. On the 4th of February, which was soon after we had got into our new course, I dreamed the ship was wrecked amidst the surfs and rocks, and that I was the means of saving everyone on board. And on the night following, I dreamed the very same dream. These dreams, however, made no impression on my mind. I'm sorry. And the next evening, being my watch below, I was pumping the vessel a little after 8 o'clock, just before I went off the deck, as it is the custom, and being weary with the duty of the day and tired at the pump, for we made a good deal of water, I began to express my impatience and uttered with an oath, he said, damn the vessel bottom out. Go ahead. But my conscience instantly smote me for the repressed expression. When I left the deck, I went to bed and had scarcely fallen asleep when I dreamed the same dream again about the ship as I had dreamed the 2 preceding nights. At 12 o'clock, the watch was changed, and as I had always the charge of the captain's watch, I then went upon deck. At half after 1 in the morning, the man at the helm saw something under the lee beam that the sea washed against, and he immediately called to me that there was a grampus and desired me to look at it. Accordingly, I stood up and observed it from some time. But when I saw the sea washed against it and again, I said it was not a fish but a rock. Being soon certain of this, I went down to the captain with some confusion, told him the danger we were in, and desired him to come up upon deck immediately. He said it was very well, and I went up again. As soon as I was upon deck, the wind, which had been pretty high, having abated a little, the vessel began to be carried. Hold on 1 second, please. All right. He goes to the captain, baby business, baby business. He observes the rock. Captain, with some confusion, told him the danger we are in and desired him to come upon deck immediately. He said it was very well, and I went up again. As soon as I was upon deck, the wind, which had been pretty high, having abated a little, the vessel began to be carried sideways towards the rock by means of the current. Still, the captain did not appear. I therefore went to him again and told him the vessel was then near a large rock, and desired he could
would come up with all speed. He said he would, and I returned to the deck. When I was upon the deck again, I saw we were not above a pistol shot from the rock, and I heard the noise of the breakers all around us. I was exceedingly alarmed at this, and the captain having not yet come on the deck, I lost all patience, and growing quite enraged, I ran down to him again and asked him why he did not come up and what he could mean by all of this. The breakers, said I, are around us, and the vessel is almost on the rocks. With that, he came on the deck with me and tried to put the vessel about and get her out of the current, but all to no purpose, the wind being very small. When we then called all hands up immediately, and after a little, we got up one end of a cable and fastened it to the anchor. By this time, the surf was foaming around us and made a dreadful noise on the breakers. And the very moment we let the anchor go, the vessel struck against the rocks. All right. It says, section 2. One swell now succeeded another, as if it were one wave calling its fellow. The roaring of the billows increased, and with one single heave of swells, the sloop was pierced and transfixed among the rocks. In a moment, a scene of horror presented itself to my mind, such as I never had conceived or experienced before. All my sins stared me in the face, and especially I thought that God had hurled his direful vengeance on my guilty head for cursing the vessel on which my life depended. My spirits at this forsook me, and I expected every moment to go to the bottom. I determined, if I should still be saved, that I would never swear again. And in the midst of my distress, while the dreadful surfs were dashing with unremitting fury among the rocks, I remembered that the Lord, though fearful that I was undeserving of forgiveness, that I thought that as he had often delivered, he might yet deliver. And calling to mind the many mercies he had shown me in times past, they gave me some small hope that he might still help me. I then began to think how we might be saved, and I believed no mind was ever like mine, so replete with inventions, and confused with schemes, though how to escape death I knew not. The captain immediately ordered the hatches to be nailed down on the slaves in the hold, where above 20 of them were, all of whom most unavoidably have perished if they had been obeyed. When he desired the men to nail down the hatches, I thought that my sin was the cause of this, and that God would charge me with these people's blood. This thought rushed upon my mind that instant with much violence that it quite overpowered me, and I fainted. I recovered just as the people were about to nail down the hatches, perceiving which I desired them to stop. The captain then said, "It must be done." I asked him why. He said that everyone would endeavor to get into the boat, which was but small, and thereby we should be drowned, for it would not have carried about 10 at the most. I could no longer restrain my emotion. I told him he deserved drowning for not knowing how to navigate the vessel, and I believe the people would have tossed him overboard if he had given them the least hint of it. However, the hatches were not nailed down, and as none of us could leave the vessel then on account of the darkness, and as we knew not where to go, and were convinced besides that the boat would not survive the surfs, we all said we would remain on the dry part of the vessel and trust to God till daylight appeared, when we should know better what to do. I then advised to get the boat prepared against morning, and some of us began to set about it, but others abandoned all care of the ship and themselves and fell to drinking. Our boat had a piece out of her bottom near 2 feet long, and we had no materials to mend her. However, the necessity became the mother of invention. I took some pump leather and nailed it to the broken part and plastered it over with tallow grease, and thus prepared, with the utmost anxiety of mind, we watched for daylight and thought every minute an hour till it appeared. Oh, where am I? At last it saluted our longing eyes, and kind Providence accompanied its approach with what was no small comfort to us, for the dreadful swells began to subside, and the next thing that we discovered to raise our dropping spirit was a key or desolate island about 5 or 6 miles off. One moment, please. Alrighty then. I know they saw me reading, but nonetheless, he found a little small island. But a barrier soon presented itself, for there was not water enough for our boat to go over the reefs, and this threw us again into a sad consternation. But there was no alternative. We were therefore obliged to put but few things in the boat at once, and what was still worse, all of us were frequently under the necessity of getting out to drag and lift it over the reefs. This caused much labor and fatigue, and what was yet more distressing, we could not avoid having our legs cut and torn very much with the rocks. There were only 4 people that would work with me at the oars, and they consisted of 3 black men and a Dutch Creole sailor. You'll never think that any other people, melanated people, were with him, and a Dutch Creole sailor. And though we went with the boat 5 times that day, we had no others to assist. But had we not worked in this manner, I really believe the people could not have been saved, for not one of the white men did anything to preserve their lives. Indeed, they soon got so drunk that they were not able but lay about the deck like swine, so that we were at last obliged to lift them into the boat and carry them on shore by force. This want of assistance made our labor intolerably severe, insomuch that by going on shore so often that day, the skin was partly ripped off my hands. We continued, however, all the day to toil and strain our extent. What is this? Exertion. Sorry, they split the words. I'm like, what is this? Exertions, till we had brought all our board safe to the shore, so that out of 32 people, we lost not one. Section 3. I think I'm gonna stop after section 3, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Section 3, chapter, I believe, 8. He says, my dream now returned upon my mind with all its force. It was fulfilling in every part, for our danger was the same I had dreamed of, and I could not help looking on myself as the principal instrument in effecting our deliverance. For owing to some of our people getting drunk, the rest of us were obliged to double our exertions, and it was fortunate we did, for in a very little time longer, the patch of the leather on the boat would have been worn out, and she would have been no longer fit for service. Situated as we were, who could think that men should be so careless of the danger they were in? For if the wind had been but raised the swell as it was when the vessel struck, we must have bid a final farewell to all the hopes of deliverance. And though I warned the people who were drinking and entreated them to embrace the moment of deliverance, nevertheless they persisted, as if not possessed of least spark of reason. I could not help thinking that if any of these people had been lost, God would charge me with their lives, which perhaps was one cause of my laboring so hard for their preservation. And indeed, every one of them afterwards seemed so sensible of the service I had rendered them, that while we were on the quay, I was kind of a chieftain amongst them. I brought some limes, oranges, and lemons on shore, and finding it to be a good soil where we were, I planted several of them as a token to anyone that might be the castaway hereafter. And that's paying it forward. That's paying it forward. This key, as we afterwards found, was one of the Bahama Islands, which consisted of a cluster of large islands with smaller ones, or keys, as they were called. Interspersed among them, it was about a mile in circumference, with white sandy beach running in a regular order along it. On that part of it where we first attempted to land, there stood some very large birds called flamingos. These, from the reflection of the sun, appeared to us a little distance as large as men. And when they walked backwards and forward, we could not conceive what they were. Our captain swore they were cannibals. They created a great panic among us, and we held a consultation how to act. The captain wanted to go to the quay that was within sight, but a great way off, but I was against it, as in so doing, we should not be able to save all the people, and therefore said, let us go on shore here, and perhaps these cannibals might take to the water. Accordingly, we steered towards them, and when we approached them, to our very great joy and no less wonder, they walked off, one after the other, very deliberately, and at last they took to flight and relieved us entirely from our fears. About the quay there were turtles and several sorts of fish in such abundance that we caught them without bait, which was a great relief to us after the salt provisions on board. There was a large rock on the beach about 10 feet high, which was in the form of a punch bowl at the top. This we could not help thinking Providence had ordained to supply us with rainwater, and it was something singular that if we did not take it when it rained, in some little time after, it would turn as salt as seawater. And so that is section 3. I believe this is chapter 8. We're up to section 4. And we just have what? 1, 2, 3, 4 more sections in this chapter. And we're making our way to chapter 9. So yes. We're back in full effect. I want to thank you for tuning in. This is Emunah Yisrael. This has been the LEV Project installment, Most High Willing. I will be back tomorrow to read another chapter and see if we cannot finish up Olaudah Equiano by next week. And then from there, I'm just going to be posting, some excerpts. I guess it's going to kind of be like a review. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, definitely check me out on Instagram, Emunah_Yisrael. And we're just going to kind of review and have conversations over the things that we have read throughout this year. So once again, thank everybody for tuning in and hope you have a blessed night. Shalom.